FM26's beta will launch on Thursday, October 23rd. But that's almost burying the lead. How could that be? Well, today, Jack, also known as Work the Space, that's probably how you know him, and Football Manager on their official YouTube channel, put out 2 pieces of content that shed an enormous amount of light on Football Manager, the development, and really what's been going on. In fact, Jack's interview is probably the best piece of Football Manager marketing specific content I've ever seen. So I want to walk you through kind of my big takeaways from these 2 pieces of content that came out and talk through how it's impacting me and my view of Football Manager. Now, one of the things I get thrown in my direction fairly sometimes is that I'm really critical of Sports Interactive and Football Manager in general. It's less for me about the game and more about how they communicate, or really the lack thereof. And I'm only critical because I care. That is just a personality trait, good, bad, or indifferent, that I have within myself. Is if I care deeply about something, I want it to be the best possible. And I have a specific view of how things should and shouldn't be done. I think historically, Sports Interactive's communication style has been trash. But that doesn't mean I think Sports Interactive is trash or Miles is trash. I think, in fact, we're really lucky to have Miles at the helm of Football Manager as a franchise. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me just pull up the takeaways from the content and I'll switch my screen here. So here's Jack's channel. Obviously, this is the video that we're talking about. I'm not going to go through it frame by frame or line by line like we would with some of the other FM26 news. It's 50 minutes long, plus some ad breaks. I highly, highly recommend you go watch it. It was that good. So I'll make sure that there's a link in the description so you can do that. My first takeaway from this interview is that we're lucky to have Miles at the helm of Football Manager. Miles comes across as a guy who built a game for himself. He's a passionate nerd, and I mean that in the most loving way possible. I think if you're watching this, you're likely a nerd, so it's not an insult. One of the things that is a bit of a relief in this interview is they talk about microtransactions, DLCs, and stuff like that. I had mentioned this in my Discord community, which is quite small, before, that my fear is that FM, if it does not do well with FM26, and Miles talked about this as well, it may go away, or it may be given to somebody else to go develop, and that would mean, I think, DLCs and microtransactions. All the stuff that people complain about with new games, with crates, and opening packs, and things like that, I think would inevitably come to Football Manager. But Miles said that's not the case. This year, what you can expect is content updates and minor updates. Think of that as the latter is more like your bug fixes, and the content updates are more like big modules, is what they called it. Like international management will be a content update. And he thinks it's important that you know in that interview that that's included in the price that you pay. He thinks it's important that it's included in the price you pay. The only microtransaction they have is the in-game editor, which I think is fine. Other games, I just bought DayZ recently. They put out a new map. That is considered a DLC. It's almost like a new game because it's a new map with all the development that went into it. Well, you've got to pay for that. Football Manager says, we're going to give it to you for free because they are laser focused on it being the highest value per dollar, euro, pound, whatever spent in terms of time spent in the game. That's what Miles wants to see, is people not just buying the game, but buying it and playing it for hours and hours and hours. Which leads me to my second takeaway, which I think is important if you're watching a relatively small YouTuber that plays Football Manager to know. And that is, Football Manager is not just designed for the 1,000 plus hour player. We get a ton of value. I do. If I play 700, 800, 1,000 hours in an edition of Football Manager and I paid $50 for it, that's unbelievable value. But Miles talks about how they've grown in 2022, or FM22, I should say, from about 2 million players to an FM24, about 20 million players. Now, I do take a little bit of umbrage with that number because I wonder how much of that is Game Pass or that type of a situation. How many people are actually playing the game? I think I saw something recently said many people don't get past 5 hours. If I'm remembering that correctly, that kind of highlights what I think you're seeing in the design of FM26. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I said multiple times in my video about there are 26 things that FM26 needs to fix. I'll try and put a video link up there for you about it. But one of the things that is odd to me is the lack of utilization of real estate on the screen. So you call that screen real estate, if you will, all the blank open spaces. On the pre-recorded, not live stream, people in the chat, I think, must have just been trolling, saying, Jarrod, you've got a game today. What are you doing, bro? Okay, lads. But they had Spencer Owen from #United and Jarrod Bowen from West Ham United, which, can I just say, I just love. Jarrod Bowen was in a Loki Doki video many years ago, and he's like a genuine FM player. I have one thing in common with Jarrod Bowen. There you go. That's lovely. But one of the things that stood out to me most is how good it utilizes this screen real estate. Now, we don't know what size screen they were recording on, but when you think about the existing versions of FM, where like you've got this tiny little box, at least on I play on a 27-inch monitor. You got all this space around the box in the middle where you pick that you're going to be unemployed or Arsenal's manager or whatever. This looks fuller. It looks good. They've utilized the space very, very well. And people are going to complain regardless of what SI does with the design aspect of this. But to me, some people have called it consolification. I think actually Jack did that in the interview. I wrote it down. But it's better utilization of the real estate. And Miles goes into detail about how they're essentially designing for everything from an iPhone, right? Apple Arcade, all the way up to a 60+ inch TV. And how to make that work can be technically challenging. But it highlights that just because you play 1,000 hours of FM doesn't mean all design decisions are going to be made for you. They need to, as a business, take those 5 or 10 or 20-hour players and turn them into 500-hour players. And that means a different design that might be more intuitive. He actually talks about how new players are picking up the new UI significantly faster than some of the alpha testers, like I'm imagining like your Dr. Benji's and Jack and Lelujo. The big content creators are probably in the mix. They're providing their feedback. But the idea is you're having to unlearn. If you've been playing FM for a long time, you're having to unlearn your muscle memory of where things are versus a new player coming in with fresh eyes goes, oh, well, that makes sense. So you got to keep that in mind with their design decisions. My third takeaway from the interview is that Sports Interactive has struggled with the growth they've experienced. It's one of those things that's like a blessing and a curse. Obviously, you want to sell more copies of the game. You want to have more people playing the game. But I think what I have felt, I guess I won't speak for the entire FM community, but I feel like Sports Interactive's communication, they just need to hire someone. Take Jack, put him in a consulting job where all he does is once a week, he does a video or he does a tweet or something consistent. But some of the stuff that Miles talks about indicates, I think, a studio that is learning as they go how to be a much bigger studio than they used to be, which is fine. And he talks a lot about wanting to learn from mistakes, and everybody wants that. But I think some of the mistakes are self-inflicted wounds that he came across as really being hurt when he doesn't get trust from the community. And I would just say trust is based on communication. Think about your personal relationships. You got to be able to communicate with people that you love. If you can't do that, you can expect that relationship to start to crumble a little bit. So he kind of owns up to that. And again, I'm not taking shots at Miles. He owns up to it at least. Like, good job. But I think I think it's tragic that it takes one content creator doing an interview with Miles that's almost an hour long. And I personally feel a lot better about the studio, the game. It makes a lot of sense. Miles talked about how people point to the word transparency in the development blog post, and he points out that we will be as transparent as we can be. Well, when you say we're going to be transparent as we can be, apparently comes across as like, I can't be transparent at all. Again, I understand it's a very complicated business. There's rights holders and all sorts of moving parts, and just don't say you're going to be transparent then. My fourth takeaway is that Sports Interactive's release of FM26 is the first step of what will be many in taking the ball out of the back of the net after an own goal. They're willing to admit that. They understand they lost trust with not putting out FM25. And again, I think more content like this is necessary to show the roadmap and the path that Sports Interactive is going to take this game franchise. Miles talked about, and again, I give him credit for being open, with being frustrated when people say, well, you've been working on it for 2 years and it's not ready. When most games, in his view, take 5 to 8 years to be ready. Even if that's true, it was their decision to move to the Unity engine. If it needs to take 5 years, have it take 5 years. Have FM24's engine run things until FM28 and then put out a great product. So There's being ambitious and like learning from your mistakes of being ambitious, and that's fine. So if they've been able to cram 5 years of work into 2 years, more credit to them. But you have to also be willing to admit that is an epic own goal. So before we go look at the premiered video with Spencer Owen and Jarrod Bowen, I do want to say a toast to Miles. The guy cares. He admits that they need to get better communicating, which has been my biggest beef. He is committed to not having DLCs and microtransactions, and I think that is an unbelievable boost to the Football Manager community. I feel bad that he's been like pushed off of social media because of the amount of hate that they got. You could see it in the chat talking about how it was rubbish, it looked rubbish, like during the premiered video. But I do think it's important to point out we have a guy at the top who cares and is not just about earning as much money for the studio as possible, because if that was the case, they would introduce DLCs and microtransactions, and it would probably be a net negative for the game. So cheers to you, Miles. Now let's talk about what we saw in the premiered video. Now they didn't talk about this, but you see that thing over there on the bottom right of the column? Online play is going to be included. Interesting. Do you play online? Would you play online? I'd like to hear from you in the comments. They spent, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority here, but in my opinion, they spent way too much time doing this. They modified there's all sorts of options. They like, it just seems like they were very proud of these options. Maybe something is different in FM26 where you get to see your manager more than just on the loading screen and then like on the occasional highlight on the sideline. I just thought this is not important. We want to see the game. Maybe there are players out there that being able to completely modify every single aspect of your appearance as a manager is important. I thought it was a bit much. Starting in this section here, and I'm going to kind of scroll through some of the screens. Miles did point out, if you have played FM before, you need to do the tutorials this year. Don't just clip through them like you would on a new save, because lots of stuff has changed and it's going to be harder on your onboarding into the new game than if you just go through the tutorials. So like you get to choose here if you're a generational superstar all the way down to a lower league veteran, or you didn't play above the amateur level in terms of building your manager. You have to pick a coaching style. Actually, you pick 3 selections. And what this does, it's kind of blanked out there. It changes the text here. So they've gotten rid of the numbers for manager attributes of 1 to 20. Miles's point was that, well, it doesn't really matter if it's a 17. Nobody knows what a 17 is or something like that, versus you're competent or you're above average or something like that. And I guess that's true, but I think we all know that somewhere within the game, competent means a number, right? Like surely it has to. I just think that's a curious choice. And you also pick your coaching style. So that green and blue set of boxes where like you take all your goalkeeping coaching experience out and put it all into adaptability because you're going to be a journeyman. You no longer do that. You make 3 selections on how you want to coach football, and that will then influence, apparently, like if you say you're an attacking, energetic, entertaining coach and you go play park the bus as a overarching tactic at a club, you can expect there to be problems, which makes sense. I do wonder, though, if that means it's not going to adapt with you, because obviously, if you're in different situations, you take over a relegation-based club, you may park the bus more. Is that okay? Or is it going to get you in trouble with the board or the fans or something like that? We'll just have to see. I thought the 2D representation here on kind of your tablet was fine at the speed that they were playing at. I do think it's a bit of a shame that they eventually moved the in-highlight speed. Like, every time at least for me, I open up a new save in FM, I go to preferences and I move it from the middle one, which always feels like pretty slow in terms of how the ball moves across the screen. It was like someone kicks the ball and it's just like, they moved it from like 1x to 1.75, which I thought was way too fast. I thought it was like a 3 or 4 from the middle in the old school way of doing it. I mean, the ball is like moving around really quickly and you couldn't really, you're like trying to show off your match engine, but they did it at pace, you might say. So I thought that was an odd choice. Spencer also showed off this like squad overview screen, which again, I think is very, very, very busy, but that's because I'm used to the old way of doing it. A console player or a new player may look at this and go, well, it looks fine. I do want to see, I don't remember if they went and clicked on like the first team button up here. He doesn't click on the first team button, at least that I remember. He clicks on the under 21 button, but you do get to see here kind of what this looks, that squad screen that we're used to seeing looks like. I'd be curious because I don't see it here does not look like you can add columns, which would be really disappointing. Now, obviously, he didn't like right click, like you would here and say insert column, but I'd like to see if there's additional options here. Again, they may say the average player doesn't use that. Just because you as a 1,000+ hour player want to see it doesn't mean it goes into the game, which is fine. That's just a design decision, but I hope that that's an option. He also showed off the transfer room in terms of the going out and seeing what other teams need. So I think this is a first for us, being able to see that, hey, Liverpool wants a squad rotation player to take Mo Salah off in the 75th minute so that, that Harvey Elliott that got sold, you could go, oh, I've got one of those, and you could try and sell one. Or, hey, Leighton Orient wants a right back on a French player. Well, I've got a 19-year-old that you could use. Let's get a loan deal going. I do think this is going to be important. Miles talked about at the beginning of the video that people were underestimating how important this was going to be. I think it's going to make it a lot easier to get stuff done. That's my hope. Overall, I think today is momentous. I think the amount of openness that Miles showed in that interview was important. And I do want to say, I know there's another interview out there that I think it's the FM show did that I haven't had a chance to watch. I was just floored, to be honest with you, by Work the Spaces video, and then the live stream came out, and I was like, I should probably just react to those two things so I can get a piece of content out. If you're excited about FM26 and maybe you've been waiting to see, that not live stream, the pre-recorded content with Spencer and Jarrod, and now you're like, I think I'm on board, you can use my link in the description below to get 22% off, and you will get the early access or advanced access beta, which is apparently what we're calling it these days, for the game coming out on Thursday, October 23rd. My understanding is that deal is also still good up until the game launches on November 4th. So if you want to watch some of my content or somebody else's content before you make a final decision, you can do that too, and you're not missing out except on the ability to play the game. If you enjoyed this, my friends, hit that like button. If you're excited about FM26, leave a comment. If you're not excited about FM26 and some of the stuff that you saw today, leave a comment on that as well. Or I guess by the time this comes out, on the stuff you saw yesterday, leave a comment below, and we'll see you very soon.